Hi, welcome to Edward Box Guitar Tuition. So my classic album inspection today is Dysfunctional by Dokken. This was released May the 23rd, 1995. So this came after Dokken split up and they reformed to do this. There's a bit of story behind that, but I'll just give you a weird context, a bit of personal story. So back in, I think it was August 1995, I went on holiday for a week to Ibiza. Basically, I was going stir crazy at home. Like things weren't going that great, and some mates were heading out there. I had just enough money to kind of get there. I actually knocked back some work to go there. I got myself a really cheap flight, and I'd never actually flown before. So I went on holiday, got absolutely pissed up, and lived in shitty accommodation for a week, and drunk cheap beer and ate tins of beans. I mean, it literally was a budget week. I spent 250 quid in total, which is only like 500 quid in a day's money or something, maybe a bit more. So it was bloody cheap. But anyway, what happened was my mates run out of money, so they were due to stay on longer. They'd gone for 2 weeks, but they run out of money. I'd only gone for a week, so they'd gone out before me. So by the time of my week ending, they were kind of 10 days in with no money. And I said, well, there's places on my flight. There was loads of places on the flight. So I said, if you get to the airport, and then what was decided was, well, come to the airport with me, but then we needed to kind of, weren't sure what time the flight was, or maybe if they couldn't get on that flight, and my mate needed to pay by credit card, so we ended up going early to the airport. My flight wasn't until late night, early morning, so I ended up spending 12 hours at Ibiza airport. Now this is in the day when airports really were shit. If you go to Ibiza airport now, you've probably got more food and drinks and commercial things, maybe to keep you occupied. I was so stupid I didn't take a book or anything, so I was literally stuck in the airport. I'd go outside and wander around, but they had one magazine kiosk and had a copy of Guitar World, I think. So I went to have a look at it, and there was an article on George Lynch and this new Dokken album, Dysfunctional. He had short hair. I was like, oh right, Dokken have got a new album out. If you remember, they split up after the Beast from the East album. Then Don Dokken did his Up from the Ashes album, which was a Dokken album in all but name. He wasn't allowed to use the individual name Dokken. And then there was just a big 5-year gap. Obviously, this period, Lynch did the Lynch Mob album, Wicked Sensation, Lynch Mob. Jeff Pilson had a band. It literally was graveyard time for these bands. But around this time anyway, Dokken got offered a deal to do an album for Japan. The upshot was was that I think Jeff Pilson was probably brought in to write with him, Mick Brown, and it's like, well, why don't you add George Lynch and make it a Dokken album? And that's why Lynch doesn't have many writing credits on this. He's got 1, 2, 3, 4 writing credits, whereas typically Lynch would be co-writing every single track. He's come in late, he's added some stuff, and he's put his solos on. This is very much a marriage of convenience. They signed a deal. It says Sony here, but obviously it came out on Columbia. This is John Kolodner was the A&R, and this is at a time when a few years later he did the Rat thing, that Rat album. And this is an attempt to kind of reboot these 80s bands, not in a nostalgic sense, kind of to bring them up to date with the sound that's going on. Anyway, as soon as I got back from holiday, I had a great tan. It was the best suntan I ever had. I went into something like Our Price, which and there it was an import. It was 18 quid. Well, I couldn't afford that because I was bloody skin. I'd just been on holiday. So what I did was I bought the album. I carefully unwrapped it, wet and taped it, took it back and got the money back. Yes, that was the sort of thing I did back then. My first impression, I thought it was good how the band had sort of updated the sound. The production's a lot rawer, or was a lot rawer. It had a more clanky sound. The vocals weren't as in a higher register, more like what was happening in the Seattle sound, a little lower. They introduced more vocal harmonies, more Beatles-esque ones, which fits in with the King's X, Galactic Cowboys, Jellyfish, sort of cult bands. There's a bit more psychedelia. And the guitar sound was more sort of earthy. So let's go through it. And I'll give you my take on it. It opens with Inside Looking Out, which I think is a good opening track. I don't think it's the best track on the album, but it is good. A kind of 7 out of 10 track. Don Dokken, Jeff Pilson write this 4 minutes and 8. I should say this is kind of 54 minutes long. It's got 12 tracks, 11 tracks as a bonus track for Japan. I didn't even know about this, but we'll come to that. Then you got Hole in My Head. This is the track that probably acquiesces to what's going on. It's got like a kind of drop deep, a sort of an Alice in Chains type riff, big vocal harmonies. George does a cool lead break. I really like this track. It might be my favourite track on the album, 4 minutes 33, and the next track, The Maze, is similar. You've got an acoustic intro, you've got a slow kind of dirgy groove, sort of more of a King's X vibe. Dokken Pilson, George Lynch gets a writing credit on this. This is another really good track. Now the next track, Too High to Fly, this was a single off the album. They still kind of play it live. This was like the signature cut. I like this track, but this is the track that kind of leans too far to what's going on in music at that time. So it's in drop D tuning. It's got a typical, a riff you could play with one finger. But it has no guitar solo. There's a little bit of bluesy lead at the start, a little bluesy at the end. So properly, when did a Dokken song not have a fucking guitar solo? It's Heartless Heart on the Tooth and Nail album, I think. That was the last time. Great track. But yeah, so that was weird. 7 minutes 10. I like it, it's good, but I don't think it's great. Then you got Nothing Left to Say. This is an acoustic ballad. Again, nice track. Not great, but it's good. And then you do Shadows of Life, which has got a typical tritone Lynch riff, quite heavy. I quite like it. Again, I don't think it's great, but I like it. You got Long Way Home. This is quite interesting. This has got some interesting middle section where Don almost sings in a psychedelic Indian sort of vibe, using interesting intervals. He pulls it off well. There's an evil Phrygian riff in it again. Yeah, and he's got a cool breakdown. George does a nice thing before the solo. Then you got Sweet Chains. This is written by Don. This is a sort of acoustic, again, tritony, leading type thing. Quite a cool Lynch lead break on this. He has a very saturated lead sound. There's a lot of notes kind of ringing together and chiming. It's quite psychedelic. So a lot of these tracks from Too High to Fly onwards, they're good. They're not great, but they're not bad tracks. They're good tracks. Lesser of Two Evils is the next track, and this is the sort of my next favourite track on the album. Not as keen on the verse, but it's got a great chorus. You can hear Jeff Pilson's harmony vocals on this. Works really well. George hits a really nasty pinch harmonic for the last note of the solo. Then you've got What Price. This is kind of like a fast, heavy track. He's kind of got a mixed in like a kind of drum rolly type thing, military sort of beat. Don's pretending to be Jim Morrison, which I quite kind of like. Then it has sort of angry lyrics, vocals, and then it goes back into its sort of psychedelic Jim Morrison bit. Yeah, probably my least favourite track on the album. It's got its merits. Then they do a cover of From the Beginning by Emerson, Lake and Palmer. This Greg Lake wrote this. I've always really loved this track. I think it works really well as a cover. I think the band do a really good job. Really nice percussion on this conga sort of, stuff. George does a nice lead break. It's got a nice intro acoustic on it. It's kind of a bit like Spiral Architect by Black Sabbath, actually. So there's Nothing Less to Say. It's got an interesting acoustic intro. But I do think it works really well, and it kind of fits the mood of the album, the mid-90s vibe, and it runs the album down. Now, I haven't checked for a while. I didn't realise that Japan had a bonus track, When the Good Die Young, 4 minutes and 55. I've just had a listen to it. To my knowledge, I've never heard this track before. I know it's terrible. I'm a Dokken fan. How did this happen? It's basically a 12/8 bluesy boogie with a kind of tritone riff and a kind of bluesy Mixolydian vibe. It's an okay track. If it was on the album, it could probably replace one of the other tracks, or it works perfectly well. Okay, so if I was marking this album, I'd give it, there's been days and times in my life when I've it's an 8 out of 10. There's been other times where it's more 7.5, 7. I feel like a 7's about right. I think the production's a bit harsh on it, and it just lacks classic track. Those Dokken albums that we love, from Breaking the Chains, the title track's a classic, Tooth and Nail, 100 Lock and Key, Back for Talent, they've all got classic Dokken tracks, classic 80s metal, LA metal tracks. This doesn't have that. But I do think it's a decent attempt. This is such a hard time for bands at this time. What's interesting with this is when this album came out, you know, by 1995, the weird things, by the time this came out, the grunge was done, really. Not this is very grungy, but Kings of X never got big. Neither did Jellyfish or other bands like that, not that they were grunge. But even Alice in Chains, you know, they having real problems in the Navy. Remember their album did come out in 1995 and 1996, the self-titled one, you know. They were kind of done by then. Soundgarden was starting to tail off. We know what happened to Nirvana, tragically. Of course, Pearl Jam had done Vitalogy, had a gap, and then with no code, it was like we were kind of abandoning sort of being rock stars, really. But weirdly enough, this album sold 400,000 copies. In today, that would be absolutely awesome. People would be, you know, whooping and hollering. But back then, it wasn't enough. I feel the Rattle Company, if they'd spent more money on a video, done more promotion, this could have gone over gold. But with a band that's used to platinum albums, they would have got dropped. This is the problem with the industry. They spent far too much money on recording, far too much on videos, and then it wasn't enough to sell several 100,000 albums. You had to be selling high 100,000, but really, really over 1 million. George, for his part, he does some nice lead breaks on this, but he's starting to fall into that thing for me that started with the Lynch Mob self-titled album, where his solos are getting less structure. He's kind of improvising in the studio and putting things together, whereas in the past he's been improvising, structuring more at home, and you get those great structure solos like Unchained the Night or Kiss of Death or whatever. His solos are mixed too low, it's a bit gnarly. I think Don does a good job. It suits him going a bit lower. Jeff Pilson stands out really good on this. He does really good backing vocals. He's basically good. Although the bass could be bigger. I think Mick Brown's excellent on this. I think Mick Brown, it's got a lot more groove, this record, and Mick Brown really embraces that. Mick Brown's a great drummer, and obviously those original Dokken tracks, it tends to be ploddy floor on the floor, but very well done. But with this, he is swinging, he is grooving, and he plays beautifully. So worth checking out. Some people love this album, some people hate it. I like it. So remember to share and subscribe, and I'll see you again soon. Thanks very much.